The departure board flashed one cruel update, and in a single ordinary afternoon, a man believed he had ruined the biggest opportunity of his life. He stood frozen on the crowded platform, watching the train disappear into the distance while everyone around him hurried on without a second glance. He had no idea that missing that one train would save him from spending the rest of his life wondering why someone had spent years searching every station, every city, and every fading memory just to find him again. Some moments feel like failures while they are happening, yet they quietly become the greatest miracles we never planned. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change lives, please take a moment to like this video, leave a thoughtful comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel so our community can continue bringing you emotional stories that remind us all to never give up on people. Graham Mercer had never expected life to become so small. At 42, his world revolved around repairing antique clocks in a modest workshop tucked between an old bookstore and a family-owned bakery. The tiny business barely paid the bills, but every restored clock reminded him that even broken things could learn to keep time again. That belief had carried him through years of loneliness after losing both of his parents within a short period. With no siblings, no wife, and no children, he poured every ounce of care into fixing forgotten treasures that everyone else considered beyond repair. Customers often noticed his gentle patience but rarely realized it came from understanding what it meant to feel forgotten himself. That afternoon he was traveling to another town to restore an enormous century-old clock inside a historic courthouse. The project promised enough income to keep his workshop alive for another year. Everything had been carefully planned until an elderly stranger collapsed on the station steps while everyone else rushed toward the arriving train. Graham never hesitated. He abandoned his suitcase, called for help, supported the frightened man until paramedics arrived, and stayed long enough to make sure the gentleman was breathing comfortably again. By the time he looked back toward the platform, the train doors had already closed. The disappointment hit him with crushing force. Years of careful budgeting, months of waiting for this opportunity, and countless hopes disappeared behind the departing train. He lowered himself onto a nearby bench, exhausted more emotionally than physically. For a few quiet minutes he questioned whether kindness had cost him the future he had worked so hard to build. Yet deep inside, he knew he would have made the same decision again. Some choices simply reveal the person we have become. Across the platform sat a woman holding an old leather folder filled with worn newspaper clippings, faded photographs, and handwritten notes collected over nearly 18 years. Her name was Meredith Holloway, a respected architect whose elegant buildings had earned admiration throughout the country. Success had brought recognition, financial comfort, and countless professional awards, but none of those achievements had quieted the question she carried every day. She had devoted almost 2 decades to finding one unknown man whose face she remembered only from a single unforgettable afternoon long ago. When Meredith was 23, she had survived a devastating highway accident during a charity cycling event. Her injuries had been severe, and confusion had clouded every memory of those terrifying hours. She remembered only fragments. An unfamiliar man had climbed into the wreckage before emergency crews arrived. He had remained calm while everyone else panicked, comforting frightened victims and helping rescuers reach those trapped inside damaged vehicles. Before anyone learned his name, he disappeared quietly after making certain everyone else was safe. Months later Meredith recovered physically, but emotionally she never forgot the stranger whose compassion had changed her understanding of courage. Newspapers briefly mentioned an unidentified volunteer who had vanished before accepting recognition. Authorities never discovered who he was. Friends encouraged her to move on, believing the mystery would never be solved. Instead, Meredith quietly carried copies of the articles whenever work sent her to another city, hoping chance might eventually accomplish what determination could not. As she waited for the delayed afternoon train, Meredith noticed Graham helping the elderly man without expecting gratitude. Something about the quiet steadiness of his movements awakened an old memory buried beneath years of disappointment. She opened her folder and compared the faded newspaper photograph with the man sitting alone on the bench. Time had added gray to his hair and lines around his eyes, yet the gentle expression remained unmistakably familiar. Her heartbeat quickened as she slowly walked toward him. Graham noticed her approaching and offered a polite smile, assuming she needed directions or perhaps wanted to ask about the station schedule. Instead, Meredith carefully placed the worn newspaper beside him. The image was grainy and decades old, but there was enough detail to recognize the young man kneeling beside an overturned vehicle, comforting an injured child. Graham stared silently at the picture. He had not seen it in years. The memories returned all at once. He remembered the accident vividly because it happened only weeks after his father passed away. Grief had consumed him, yet helping strangers that afternoon gave him a reason to keep moving when his own world had collapsed. He had never spoken about it because he believed countless others had done far more than he had. To him, compassion did not deserve applause. It was simply the right thing to do. Meredith's eyes filled with tears she had promised herself never to waste on false hope again. For 18 years she had imagined hundreds of conversations, yet now words felt almost impossible. She gently explained that she had searched libraries, hospitals, volunteer organizations, insurance records, community newspapers, and countless railway stations hoping one ordinary day might bring an impossible meeting. Every unsuccessful search strengthened her belief that gratitude should never have an expiration date. Graham listened with quiet disbelief. No one had ever looked for him before. He had spent so many years believing his life passed unnoticed that the idea someone had carried his memory for nearly 2 decades felt overwhelming. As the afternoon stretched on beneath bright skies, they found a nearby cafe overlooking the station square. They spoke for hours about lives that had unfolded in completely different directions yet remained mysteriously connected by one forgotten afternoon. Meredith described how surviving the accident inspired her to redesign public buildings with greater attention to accessibility and emergency safety. Every award she accepted silently belonged to the stranger whose example had changed her understanding of responsibility. Graham shared the quieter story of his own life. He admitted that loneliness often convinced him his existence mattered very little beyond repairing old clocks. He confessed how frequently he questioned whether simple acts of kindness made any lasting difference in a world moving too quickly to notice them. Meredith answered not with dramatic speeches but with the evidence she had carried for years. She opened the folder page by page. There were newspaper clippings. Maps with towns carefully marked. Letters sent to organizations asking about unidentified volunteers. Notes from people who thought they had found him but had not. The folder represented thousands of miles traveled, hundreds of hopeful conversations, and countless disappointments that never destroyed her determination. Graham realized something extraordinary. The greatest gift he had ever given another person was one he never even remembered giving. Their unexpected reunion spread further than either expected after a local journalist recognized Meredith outside the cafe. The story appeared in regional newspapers the following week, not because it involved celebrities or fortune, but because people rarely witnessed gratitude surviving 18 years without fading. Readers responded with letters describing teachers, neighbors, nurses, firefighters, and strangers whose forgotten kindness had quietly transformed their own lives. Graham's small workshop suddenly received visitors from across the region who wanted old family clocks restored by the man who reminded them that goodness still existed. Business improved, but more importantly, Graham's sense of purpose changed. Every customer carried a story. Every repaired clock represented another family's memories continuing to tick forward instead of remaining frozen by loss. He no longer believed he was simply fixing machinery. He was preserving pieces of people's lives. Meredith also discovered healing she had never expected. For years she carried guilt believing she had never properly thanked the person who changed her future. Meeting Graham finally allowed gratitude to replace regret. She established a foundation supporting ordinary citizens who performed quiet acts of courage without public recognition. Rather than celebrating fame, the organization honored compassion that expected nothing in return. Months passed beneath countless bright afternoons filled with community projects, volunteer events, and restored friendships. Graham often visited schools, not as a famous hero but as an ordinary man explaining how life-changing decisions usually arrive disguised as inconvenient interruptions. Students listened carefully when he described missing the most important train of his career because he stopped to help a stranger. They smiled when he admitted that what seemed like the worst moment of his week became the greatest blessing of his entire life. One sunny afternoon nearly a year after their meeting, Graham returned to the same railway station carrying another repaired antique clock destined for a museum. The familiar departure board glowed above the platform exactly as it had the day everything changed. He watched passengers rushing toward trains with anxious expressions, each convinced every delay represented disaster. Meredith joined him carrying the same weathered leather folder, though now its final pages contained photographs of their reunion, community events, smiling volunteers, and families inspired by a story that proved kindness echoes farther than anyone can predict. She no longer carried the folder as a symbol of unfinished searching. It had become a reminder that hope deserves patience. Together they looked toward the tracks where one missed train had rewritten 2 lives forever. Neither wished things had happened differently. If Graham had reached the train on time, Meredith would never have recognized him. If he had ignored the elderly man, he would have boarded successfully but missed the greater destination waiting on the platform. Fate had not rewarded perfection. It had quietly honored compassion. Graham eventually understood that every repaired clock passing through his hands shared the same lesson. Time never truly moves backward, yet it constantly offers chances to make yesterday's pain meaningful. Meredith finally understood that gratitude is strongest when it refuses to surrender to time. Their friendship became a living reminder that people rarely realize the importance of their smallest actions because the greatest consequences often unfold where they cannot see. Before we reach the end of this journey, please leave a meaningful comment sharing one act of kindness that changed your life or one person you have never forgotten. Your story may become the hope someone else desperately needs today. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. As the afternoon sun warmed the station platform, another train arrived, another crowd hurried forward, and another ordinary day continued as though nothing remarkable had happened. Yet 2 people smiled quietly, knowing that the greatest moments in life are rarely announced by perfect timing. Sometimes they begin with disappointment, grow through compassion, and end with a miracle waiting on the platform we almost never reached. From that day forward, Graham never described himself as the man who missed a train. He simply became the man who discovered that the longest journeys of the heart often begin exactly where our carefully planned paths come to an unexpected stop.